The History of Western Immoren, Part 2. Ancient History. The Elves were the first to possess the written word and have the longest-reaching records, although their history is now is of a broken and shattered legacy with many gaps related to the collapse of their first empire in ruin and devastation. The Dwarves of Rule boast the only unbroken and continuous civilization. The establishment of Gord as a home for their codex took place more than 2,000 years before the time of Synod, which would begin the era of recorded history among the human Menites. Onset of civilization. The Empire of Laos. For virtually all of human recorded history, Eastern and Western Immoren have been divided. Little is known by humanity of Eastern Immoren. All that remains are the partly preserved records carried by Lyoss by the surviving refugees of Lyoss, the first great civilization of the age. They have rarely shared tales of their ancient past with outsiders. In these ancient times, after the Elves spread and multiplied for generations across Western Immoren, the Divine Court made themselves known and set them on a path of unification. The gods took an active hand in shaping their ways. Among the first tasks required of the leaders of the tribes was the construction of numerous great fans, the temples of the Elves, to facilitate communion with the gods. Connecting these gave rise to the Empire of Laos. While the unification of the scattered tribes was a time of war and strife, it taught the Laosians the art of battle that served them well against external threats in the centuries to follow. Surrounded by all sides by aggressive and more primitive tribes of various species, including ruthless and vicious savages called the Scorn, Laos committed to expanding, patrolling its borders, and building vast cities. The continent itself is different in that age, without the vast sweeping deserts that filled the center today. This region was crossed by a myriad of rivers dividing the fertile farmlands. The golden era of this empire would rise and pass into memory before the first great cities of mankind. The oldest towers of Nishil, its capital, were already old and starting to crumble before the first stones were laid for the ruined city of Gord. The empire might have well encompassed all of Immoren in time, if not for a disaster of its own devising. The Feud of Ages and the founding of Gord. In the glass peaks of Western Immoren, the dwarven clans descended from the Great Fathers fell into a conflict that escalated into a terrible conflagration. The words of the Great Fathers had not been forgotten, yet the edicts of the Codex had become twisted and used to justify feuds of a scope beyond all reason, as clan beset clan and sought one another's extinction. Young clans felt oppressed by the elder and more powerful ones and banded together to seize prestigious holdings. These then fought each one another over dividing the spoils. This war was the Feud of Ages, the only major internal conflict in Ruic history, a period viewed with shame. Starting in 8500 BR, the Feud of Ages is believed to have lasted 300 years, although the conflicts during this time were intermediate and irregular, occupying both small and large battles, as clans often switched sides, allegiances, and both seized and abandoned significant claims. Control of mountain passes and other routes of trade and travel, such as the great rivers of the Grass Peaks, and access to the inland river sea of Lake Armsdeep were primary sources of contention. The end of the Feud of Ages is closely tied with the founding of the great city of Gord in 8200 BR, now the capital of Rule, the most ancient of great cities in Western Immoren. Several of the foundational buildings of Gord are already sacred, connected to the Great Fathers and the Clay Wives. The 13 clans that still bore the names of the Great Fathers, and deemed most closely descended from them, came to Gord in the spirit of their progenitors to unite and join their estates and holdings The most violent and vindictive of the younger warring clans who would not bow were cast out. These fated clans are not well documented, but some likely settled on the fringes of the region, eventually rejoining rule, but others went elsewhere, either to establish communities as of yet undiscovered or to perish in obscurity. The 13 stone clans restored the codex and created the government by which would become rule, with Gord as its center. The leaders of these clans became the Stone Lords, and together governed and arbitrated disputes among the clans until 7500 BR, when the Stone Lords consented to the founding of the Moot of the 100 Houses, whereby the 100 greatest clans of rule would together oversee the laws and arbitration of rule, recording all disputes and their resolutions in the growing codex. While duels and clan feuds on a smaller scale were ordinary aspects of Ruic politics, all such strife was carefully governed by the laws of the Moot and its stern judges, and never again was the great general welfare of rule placed in risk. Unlike some other races, the dwarves did not multiply in great numbers or seek to spread beyond the glass peaks, and so while their civilization slowly expanded, it remained isolated from the barbaric tribes beyond the mountains. The passes providing routes to rule were heavily fortified and garrisoned, giving rule uniquely formidable borders and allowing them to easily repel smaller and less ordered groups that might threaten them. While contact and trade was established between the Ruic Moot and delegates from the Empire of Lyoss, interaction between them was limited and wary. As Laos continued to expand, the rule folk prepared for the inevitability of war. Eikthyr and Sinat. There are scholars who believe that Menop's chosen tribes established now forgotten civilizations, but there has been little evidence. If any such empires existed, they were swallowed by the sands of the east of the area now recognized as Western Immoren. What is known is that the largest tribe of Menites undertook a pilgrimage west, following their priests on a journey where the passage was challenged by the godless, until they at last reached the shores of Meridius. It is here that they founded the first great city of mankind, Eikthyr. At this holy site, the words of the sacred canon of the true law were made manifest on a stone as the first war writings inscribed by the hand of Menop himself. It was the study of these words that brought the knowledge of reading and writing to humanity, one of Menop's greatest gifts. While first inscribed in stone, the words of the true law would eventually be copied and translated countless times. It remains the sacred text to the Menite faith, although there are some conflicting iterations, and many of the original stone inscriptions have been crumbled to dust over the passage of time. Historians have carefully examined these and other copies of ancient writings from the early days believed, and other copies of ancient writing from these early days believed Eikthyr was settled around 6500 BR, which marks the first recorded Menite civilization. Passages of the true law speak of kings that would arise, chosen by the will of Menop himself, and whose holiness allowed them to serve as conduits for the divine. These priest-kings are the most revered leaders of the Menite faith, each capable of manifesting awe-inspiring miracles in the name of the Creator of man. Sinat was the first great priest-king of Eikthyr. He was said to be able to turn ash into grain and salt into nectar. It was through him that the Menites delivered the gift of the sheaf to his people, and by his teachings Eikthyr flourished and allowed its growing numbers to be fed. He implemented aqueducts and irrigation and organized laborers in the city of quarrying stone with which to build both homes and walls. By his guiding hand, Menites were exalted above the warring tribes that surrounded them. As early civilization grew, so did the need for the priesthood to organize. Sinat set the first hierarchy of the Menite faith and its clergy in place. His priests led warriors of the faith into battle against both the godless savages and the surrounded Ichthir, but also against the beasts of the wild. Sinod lived for 4 centuries, guiding his people, his longevity another of the Creator's miracles. After he was gone, the region continued to serve as the Cradle of Civilization. By 5500 BR, a warrior of faith named Belkor and a sage priest named Geth led an exodus northward, seeking to spread civilization. The Dragon Father. Dragons exist in old legends as fiendishly powerful monsters, once thought to be embodiments of the Devourer Worm. They were imperishable terrors that passed overhead on shadowy wings and breathed fire on any that offended them. As scholars learn more about dragons, they become less certain of their nature, for they have little in common with anything else that walks, flies, or swims. All dragons originate from one progenitor, Turok, called the Dragon Father. For the last 16 centuries, this creature has been worshipped as a god by those dwelling in the island empire west of Immoren. Those who worship the Dragon Father claim he has always been a part of the world, although he never participated in the frenzy of fertility and generation that gave rise to life on Arcane. Turok and the other dragons may not be alive by ordinary reckoning. They do not breed or propagate as other species do, but possess immortality rooted in the heartstone, an indestructible crystal called an Ophnic. Turok's worshippers believe at some point in the ages past, Turok became tired of his solitary existence and created a brood to serve him. He divided his Ophnic, and each of them splintered a new dragon came into being, each uniquely terrible. This act did not proceed as intended, for the dragons were too similar to their maker. Each possessed inhuman pride, and thought itself superior to all others. They refused to bow to their father, and they rebelled. Turok was mightier than them individually, but together they were a formidable force. After a titanic struggle amidst the skies of Cain, the dragons scattered. From that point forward, Turok sought to hunt down and gather the pieces of his essence, to undo his mistake. The other dragons in their scattered lairs kept watch for their father, and remained ready to flee from him. In the meanwhile, they took out their aggression on lesser creatures that crawled upon the world. Many dragons earned their own sagas, and legends as they layered atop inaccessible mountain peaks or other remote locations. Such names such as Asifos, Blightergast, Charsug, Everblike, Halfang, and Scarfang prompted nearly as much fear and as dread in their legends as the Turok the Dragon Father. On few occasions, a dragon has been defeated, often at great cost by vast armies. They have shown an ability to reform flesh and scale from their Ophnic and rise again. The only permanent extinction of dragons has been when one has fallen to the claws of Turok, or another of their kind. Galvang, Nector, Pyromalefic, and Skaz are names of dragons that are no more. Addendum. Use of BR and AR. The human dating system used throughout Western Immoren divides history into 2 distinct epochs, defined by the struggle against the Orgoth. Older dates count backwards from the start of the rebellion and are listed as BR, before rebellion, while more recent dates count forward and are listed as AR, after rebellion. Certain cultures use a different standard for counting dates. Rule designates the 0 year as the founding of Gord, so they consider the current year to be 8,808 G dates before the founding of the G. Dates before the founding of Gord are designated with an X. Iosian dates are based on the Cataclysm, which is indicated with the symbol uppercase in this appropriate location for the date. The year currently is 608 AR, is translated as uppercase 4574 by Iosian reckoning. Ruick and Iosian dates are not to be used in this chapter. End addendum. The Mulgur. Beyond the fields of civilization spreading from Ichthir, struggles for dominance and survival occupied bands of Trollkin, Orgron, Goblins, and the tribes of humanity that had forsaken their creator. The one uniting aspect shared by the wild tribes was a reverence for the Devourer Worm, embodied in the countless tomatic forms. Shamans of these barbaric tribes supplicated the worm through bloody sacrifice, invoking their own miracles, deemed unholy by the Menites. The rites of these groups involved cannibalism, self-mutilation, and bloodletting, conducted either upon each other or outsiders when they can gather the strength and raid fringe settlements. By and large, the Menite communities had the greater discipline and the capacity to organize armed defenses, but the menace of the Mulgur steadily grew, particularly as the barbarians began to gather in numbers. Though the Mulgur possessed little organization and battles between competing tribes were common, they shared an identity drawn from the shamans and their rites. Bands of raiders would prey even well-defined rival villages or isolated townships. The Mulgur learned to communicate with one another, creating a Morgrel tongue unique to themselves, drawn from desperate dialects of 1,000 tribes. They emulate the writings of the Menites, carving into stone a crude runic alphabet. Shamans discovered these inscriptions empowered their mystical rites. Barter and news were spread from one Mulgur tribe to another, with runners set to challenge rivals or called a gathering to battle. Records from the Menites of the early days speak of attacks by the Mulgur in a terrifying language, describing them as, quote, half man, half beast, unquote. Certain humans who have embraced the worm demonstrate the ability to transform, grow in size and strength, while filled with a murderous madness. In modern times, such savages still exist in a tribe called the Thran, which is most certainly direct descendants of the Mulgur. The sight and sound of these blood-maddened warriors with their pounding drums and great howls was horrifying and blasphemous to the settled peoples. The Mulgur poured from the wilderness and delighted in murder, feasting on the fallen, willingly destroying anything in their path. The Cataclysm in the East. While the Menites spread their civilization and the Mulgur began to band together, a great work was underway in the East, which would forever change Immoren. Within the empire of Lyoss, a message spread from the great Fanes that the gods sought to walk among them. The greatest priests communed with the divine court and discerned their desire to create the bridge of worlds, a great structure that would facilitate crossing between the Veld and Cain. The gods had discovered that in the passing millennia there had been a thickening of the barriers between the afterlife and the world of the living. While mortal souls were light and insubstantial enough to pass through the membrane separating the worlds, the gods could only do so by exerting tremendous energies, making it difficult for them to bestow blessings upon their mortal followers. The Bridge of Worlds would allow the gods to pass to Cain whenever they wished. Its construction would be shared between mortal and divine, with half of the bridge being built in the Veld and the other half extending into the sky of Nysil, the capital of the empire. Directed by the gods, the people of Lyoss began this undertaking circa 4250 BR. Arcane secrets were passed to them through the priesthood, including techniques by which force of will could be directed and magnified to lift and manipulate massive pieces of stone and metal. Through miracles of both engineering and the arcane, construction of the Bridge of Wonders began. It was not required that the Lyossians understand every principle of the work, only that they follow the instructions of the gods. Great arcane generators were erected beneath the superstructure of the towering bridge, which would be the largest and most impressive engineering accomplishment ever attempted by mortal hands. While the bridge was being erected, a lattice of metal sigils was inlaid across the streets of the capital, extending for miles into the surrounding lines, an archaic foundation that distributed energy from the cyclopean structure. Bolstered by their tremendous longevity and inspired by divine visions, multiple generations came to maturity and joined their parents and grandparents in contributing to the ongoing labor. Laosian records recovered from Lyoss suggest the bridge reached completion by 4000 BR. As the date of completion neared, the people of Lyoss were filled with eager anticipation, prepared for the great festival to celebrate the arrival of their gods. The streets of Nysil were filled with pilgrims, the already crowded city filled to twice its normal capacity, with teeming throngs concentrated near the base of the bridge, where the hopeful intended to greet the gods. Unfortunately, the hopes of the Lyossian people could not be forestalled the Cataclysm. What went wrong is a mystery as much as the ancients of the scholars in the present, and even the gods themselves must not know, since otherwise it seems unfathomable that they have gone forward with their plans. The fact that the divine Gord was neither omniscient or omnipotent was proven this in the time to come. Not knowing doom awaited them, the Lyossians activated the great mechanisms of the Bridge of Worlds. For a moment, all seemed well, as the 8 gods of the divine Gord entered the world of Cain. At just that moment, the bridge exploded in a torrent of violent, sweeping power. The explosive force was so great, Immoren itself cracked and shuddered. Along what was once the vibrant Lyoss River opened the abyss, a chasm so deep it reached into the hot arteries of the world, where molten stone flowed like blood. Nysil, once a glorious capital, was instantly obliterated, together with the millions of Lyossians who had gathered. Where it stood was nothing but a gaping chasm, a wound in the world. The gods endured, but they found the world consumed by destruction. Unnatural blue-white fires spread in the wake of this explosion, flames that burned indefinitely without apparent fuel and could not be extinguished. The very stones burned like cordwood. Weather patterns across Immoren changed irrevocably, and what was once a small desert far to the southwest of Nysil became a vast waste. Along the abyss, freakish energies combined with seismic upheaval to birth the Stormlands, a region of unrelenting lightning and rain that still persists thousands of years later. The empire of Lyoss ceased to exist, delivered into annihilation. The destruction went far beyond the capital, causing death and carnage all along the major cities of the empire. Those inhabiting the fringes starved, or were set upon by predators and beasts, including fresh horrors arisen in the wake of the Arcane devastation. The empire might have been erased without a single survivor, if not for the intervention of the weakened but still pursuant gods of the divine court. The 8 gods used their powers to shelter many thousands of refugees as they could. Together they fled into the west, where they could find shelter amid the isolated vale they named Lyoss. Records pointing to the Cataclysm can be found in ancient human legends. In the annals of the ancient sage Argrunt, it was called the Time of the Burning Sky. A tremendous bright light in the east presaged the destruction, when the night sky became like day, but with a baleful intensity that soon faded and was replaced by howling winds and storms. The earth opened to swallow entire towns on the eastern fringes, while the rain of fire lasted 60 days and 60 nights, blasting the region, creating what would be subsequently known as the Bloodstone Marches. Lakes dried up, livestock became barren, and dangerous creatures fled before the wild weather, wreaking havoc wherever they passed. The Menites scattered, but most moved up to the coasts, where the fertile region near the Black River that would soon be called Calassia. The city of ancient Ichthyr, first city of man, was abandoned and would not be reclaimed for 1,000 years. The rise of Mord. Somewhere around 4800 BR, 8 centuries before the time of the burning sky, a strong civilization began to take root in the valley amidst the heavily forested region now called the Thornwood. It was thought the first leaders of Mord were an offshoot of the sect of the Mennite Exodus, led by Geth 7 centuries earlier. There are fragmented passages that hint of a schism that led to the founders of Mord turning from their Mennite teachings, although inheriting many of the gifts of civilization provided by Sinnot. Little is known of the culture or religious beliefs of Mord, although in legends it is a kingdom associated with darkness and corruption. Where the taint of Mord existed from its founding or festered later, the warriors of the Valley of Mord managed to drive back the Mulgur tribes and secure their own legacy. The people of Mord explored occult rituals that would never have been condoned by the Mennite priesthood. Warfare with the Mord gave rise to an aggressive and violent civilization, one with convoluted and brutal internal politics based on the competition between rival warlords. The kingdom of Mord was not united until 3500 BR, after the warlords of 10 smaller fiefdoms came to an uneasy accord. Thus, the fledgling kingdom had prospered against neighboring tribes. Unearthed records suggest dark pacts and conspiracies at the heart of the Moric domination. Long before humanity mastered the Arcane, the lords of Mord were rumored to possess terrible powers, including the ability to make corpses rise from their graves and take up weapons to become tireless guardians. Descriptions of battles with the neighboring Midar describe serpentine monsters descending from the sky on bat-like wings and call to the Moric generals. Other monsters erupted from below the earth to swallow enemies whole. Some of this has been dismissed as superstition, but all stories imply that the leaders of Mord had access to lore mankind was not meant to know. The tainted gains made by Mord as civilization would foster evil within the Thornwood is still plague the present to this day.